Iran isn't working alone anymore. The country that chants death to Israel now has powerful friends. Russia provides the weapons, Turkey offers the gateway, and together they're rehearsing scenarios that look exactly like an ancient biblical prophecy. What Ezekiel described 2,600 years ago is forming right now, and most people have no idea.
Ezekiel chapter 38 lists specific nations by their ancient names: Magog, Persia, Cush, Put, Gomer, and Togarmah. For hundreds of years, Bible scholars debated what these names meant. Then archaeologists started digging. They found maps, trade routes, and ancient records. The locations became clear. Magog refers to the land north of the Black Sea, modern-day Russia. Persia is easy, that's Iran. It never changed its name until 1935, but it's the same place. Cush and Put cover the region from Sudan to Libya. Gomer points to parts of Turkey and Eastern Europe. Togarmah sits in modern Turkey and Armenia. Here's what makes this strange. These nations had nothing in common historically. Different religions, different empires, different enemies. Persia and Russia never formed alliances in ancient times. Turkey spent centuries fighting Russia in multiple wars. The idea that they'd unite seemed impossible, but Ezekiel said they would. He described a coalition led by a chief prince from Magog. This leader would gather nations that come from the far north and from Persia. They'd plan an invasion against Israel, a land described as being resettled after destruction, with people gathered from many nations. The timing detail matters. Ezekiel said this happens when Israel is living in safety or dwelling securely, not necessarily at peace, but established as a nation again. For over 1,800 years, Israel didn't exist. No nation, no government. Jews scattered worldwide. Then 1948 happened. Israel became a nation again after nearly 2 millennia. The prophetic clock started ticking, but the coalition still seemed unlikely. Until now. 50 years ago, Iran and Israel weren't enemies. Under the Shah, Iran actually had diplomatic ties with Israel. They conducted trade, shared intelligence, cooperated on security matters. Iranian Jews lived openly without persecution. Everything changed in 1979. The Islamic Revolution transformed Iran overnight. Ayatollah Khomeini took power and immediately declared Israel an enemy. He called it an illegitimate state that must be erased. This wasn't political rhetoric, it became official government policy. Since then, Iran invested billions into one goal: building a network to threaten Israel. They created Hezbollah in Lebanon, armed Hamas in Gaza, funded militias in Syria and Iraq, developed long-range missiles, pursued nuclear technology, every move calculated for future confrontation. But Iran had a problem: geography. They don't share a border with Israel. Between them sits Iraq and Syria. Moving massive military forces across that distance is nearly impossible without control of those territories. That's why Iran spent decades building proxy forces to create a land bridge. They call it the Axis of Resistance, a network stretching from Tehran to the Mediterranean. Iranian weapons flow through Iraq into Syria, then into Lebanon. The Revolutionary Guard trains fighters in all three countries. It's not just influence anymore, it's infrastructure for war. Yet Iran still lacked something critical: advanced military technology, air superiority, international backing for a major operation. They needed partners with real power. Alone, Iran could harass Israel through proxies, but the invasion Ezekiel described requires more. And it requires allies who bring capabilities Iran doesn't have. That's where Russia enters the picture, and the timing is remarkable. Russia and Iran were never friends. The Soviet Union actually supported Israel's creation in 1948. They provided weapons during Israel's War of Independence. For decades, Moscow kept distance from Tehran, especially during the Shah's era when Iran allied with America. The relationship shifted slowly. After the Islamic Revolution, both nations found themselves opposing American influence in the Middle East. But real cooperation didn't begin until Syria's civil war in 2011. When Assad's government started collapsing, Iran panicked. Syria was their crucial link to Hezbollah. If Assad fell, Iran's land bridge to the Mediterranean would break. They begged Russia for help. In 2015, Putin sent forces into Syria. This created something new: Russian and Iranian military forces operating together. Joint command centers, shared intelligence, coordinated strikes. For the first time in history, the military powers of Magog and Persia were functioning as partners. Then it deepened. Russia started selling advanced weapons to Iran: S-300 air defense systems, fighter jet technology, satellite intelligence sharing. The relationship moved beyond Syria. In 2022, Iran provided Russia with military drones for use in Ukraine. Russia returned the favor with deeper military cooperation. By 2023, both nations conducted joint naval exercises. Their forces trained together in the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Oman. Russia announced plans to sell Su-35 fighter jets to Iran. These aren't symbolic gestures. This is integration. What makes this significant? Russia brings what Iran lacks: air power, advanced technology, naval capability, international diplomatic cover at the UN Security Council. And something else: experience operating near Israel's borders through their presence in Syria. Russia now has permanent military bases in Syria, less than 40 miles from Israel's northern border. Iranian forces operate nearby. The two nations that Ezekiel named as coalition leaders now share military infrastructure within striking distance of Israel. But the coalition needs one more piece. Turkey used to be Israel's Muslim ally. They had a strategic partnership, military cooperation, trade agreements. Turkish tourists visited Israel. Israeli pilots trained in Turkish airspace. As recently as the 1990s, the relationship looked permanent. Then Recep Tayyip Erdogan came to power, and he didn't just change Turkey's foreign policy, he transformed Turkey's entire identity. Erdogan sees himself as a neo-Ottoman leader, restoring Turkey to its historical role as protector of Muslims worldwide. His rhetoric against Israel became harsh. He called Israel a terrorist state, compared Israeli actions to Hitler, hosted Hamas leaders in Ankara. Turkey's relationship with Israel collapsed, but Erdogan went further. He started rebuilding Turkey's influence across the old Ottoman territories: Syria, Iraq, Libya. Here's what's critical: Turkey now coordinates with both Russia and Iran, despite having different objectives in Syria. They formed the Astana Process, a trilateral arrangement where Turkey, Russia, and Iran decide Syria's future. It shouldn't work. These three nations back different groups. They have competing interests. Yet they meet regularly, negotiate zones of control, coordinate military movements. They created something that didn't exist before: a functional mechanism for the three powers to operate together. Turkey also controls crucial geography. Any large-scale military movement toward Israel from the north would likely pass through or near Turkish territory. Turkey controls the routes from Russia's southern regions. They border Syria and Iraq. Their cooperation would be essential for the kind of invasion Ezekiel described. In 2024, Erdogan went further. He suggested Turkey might intervene militarily to support Gaza. He compared potential action to Turkey's operations in Libya and Nagorno-Karabakh. Whether he meant it or not, the statement revealed his thinking. Turkey sees itself as a potential military actor in the Israeli conflict. Now all three nations, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, have military presence or influence in Syria. They coordinate despite their differences. The coalition core is functional. But Ezekiel mentioned other nations too. Ezekiel listed Cush, Put, Gomer, and Togarmah. These names point to regions across North Africa, the Caucasus, and Eastern Europe. Not every scholar agrees on exact borders, but ranges include Libya, Sudan, parts of Ethiopia, and former Soviet territories. What's happening in these regions? Libya is fragmented, with Turkey supporting the Western government and Russia backing forces in the east. Both Turkey and Russia have military presence there. Sudan recently shifted closer to Russia, signing naval base agreements. Ethiopia has complex relationships with Turkey through defense deals. These aren't coincidental. Turkey and Russia are expanding influence across the exact regions Ezekiel mentioned. They're building military relationships, selling weapons, establishing bases, creating dependencies. Former Soviet states in the Caucasus and Central Asia maintain deep connections to Russia. Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the Central Asian republics all have Russian military presence or agreements. When Ezekiel mentioned forces from the far north and remote parts, these regions fit. The point isn't that every country is ready to march on Israel tomorrow. It's that the influence networks are forming. Russia and Turkey are creating relationships across these territories. Military cooperation frameworks exist. When the time comes for the coalition Ezekiel described, the infrastructure is already built. There's also the issue of mercenaries and proxy forces. Modern warfare doesn't require every nation to send official armies. Russia uses Wagner Group, Iran uses proxy militias. Turkey employs Syrian fighters in Libya and Azerbaijan. The coalition could assemble without formal declarations of war. The framework is operational. But what would actually trigger this coalition to act? What would make this prophecy move from possibility to reality? Ezekiel said the coalition comes to capture spoil and to seize plunder. Some translations say they come with evil thoughts or an evil plan. The motivation isn't purely religious. There's a strategic calculation. What could trigger this? Several scenarios emerge from current events. First, Israel's energy discoveries. In the past 15 years, Israel found massive natural gas fields in the Mediterranean. The Leviathan and Tamar fields contain trillions of cubic feet of gas. Israel transformed from energy dependent to energy exporter. They supply gas to Egypt and Jordan, with plans for Europe. This changes the equation. Israel now possesses resources other nations want. Russia depends on energy exports for economic survival. Controlling or disrupting Israeli energy supplies would have strategic value. It's not speculation, it's geopolitics. Second, nuclear developments. If Iran approaches nuclear weapons capability, Israel has indicated they'll act militarily. Such a strike could trigger exactly the kind of coalition response Ezekiel described. Iran calls for support. Russia and Turkey face decisions about backing their partner. The alliance activates. Third, the Abraham Accords expansion. Israel normalized relations with UAE, Bahrain, Morocco. Negotiations continue with Saudi Arabia. Every new agreement isolates Iran further. It weakens their axis of resistance narrative. A growing threat perception in Tehran could drive desperate action. Fourth, Syria's situation. Russian and Iranian forces operate there now, but the conflict remains unstable. Certain scenarios, Assad's fall, chemical weapons use, and direct Israeli-Iranian confrontation could spiral into regional war quickly. Ezekiel mentioned hooks in jaws, suggesting the coalition gets pulled into action almost against initial judgment. That description fits a scenario where events spiral beyond control. A trigger incident that forces decisions quickly. Not a carefully planned invasion, but a rapid response to crisis that assembles the coalition. The question isn't if triggers exist. Multiple triggers are already present. The question is timing. Ezekiel didn't just describe the coalition, he mentioned nations that protest, but don't join. Sheba, Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish with their young lions. These names matter because they reveal who doesn't participate. Sheba and Dedan point to the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the Gulf states. These nations have been moving closer to Israel, not away. The Abraham Accords reflect this shift. They see Iran as their threat, not Israel. When the coalition forms, Ezekiel says these nations essentially ask, "Have you come to plunder?" They question the invasion, but don't stop it. This fits current dynamics perfectly. Saudi Arabia and Gulf states oppose Iranian expansion, but they're not military powers capable of confronting Russia, Iran, and Turkey simultaneously. Tarshish traditionally points to Western commercial powers. Some scholars suggest Spain or Britain historically. The young lions might represent nations that emerged from British influence, potentially including the United States, Canada, Australia. The prophecy suggests these nations protest, but don't intervene militarily, just words, diplomatic statements, and perhaps sanctions. but not military action to stop the invasion. This creates an interesting scenario. Israel faces the coalition without major allied military support. They stand alone against multiple nations. Yet Ezekiel is clear about the outcome. The coalition doesn't succeed, not because Israel defeats them militarily, but because of divine intervention. Which brings us to what happens next. Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 detail what happens to the coalition. The description is dramatic and specific. Earthquakes strike, infighting breaks out among coalition forces, plague and bloodshed spread through their armies. Torrential rain, hailstones, fire and burning sulfur fall. The prophecy states that 5/6 of the invading force is destroyed. Only a sixth survives. The destruction is so complete that it takes 7 months to bury the dead. Israelis spend 7 years burning the leftover weapons for fuel. Whether you interpret this literally or symbolically, the message is clear. The coalition fails catastrophically. What seemed like overwhelming force against a small nation collapses completely. Ezekiel gives the purpose for this outcome. God says he does this so the nations will know that I am the Lord. It's not just about Israel's survival. It's about demonstrating divine power to the whole world. Both Israel and the nations who didn't know God would recognize his intervention. The timing detail matters here. This happens when Israel is living securely. Some interpret this as the false peace during the first half of a tribulation period. Others see it as describing Israel's current state. Militarily strong enough to feel secure despite surrounding threats. The description doesn't sound like conventional warfare alone. The scale of destruction, the supernatural elements, the global recognition. It points to something beyond normal military conflict. For those watching current events, the coalition forming is significant not because it proves the invasion is imminent, but because it proves the invasion is now possible in a way it never was before. The pieces are on the board. Russia, Iran, and Turkey coordinate militarily in Syria right now. They conduct joint exercises, share intelligence, sell advanced weapons to each other. Their influence networks extend across North Africa and Central Asia, the exact regions Ezekiel mentioned. Israel possesses energy resources worth controlling. Nuclear tensions with Iran are rising. Regional alliances are shifting. Saudi Arabia and Gulf states are moving toward Israel while questioning the coalition's intentions, exactly as prophecy suggests. This doesn't mean the invasion happens tomorrow. Prophecy and current events aren't always on the same timeline. But what was impossible for 2,600 years is now operational. The specific nations Ezekiel named now have the relationships, the geography, the motivation, and the capability. You're watching something assemble that hasn't existed since ancient times. Whether it leads to the exact fulfillment Ezekiel described, or whether we're seeing the framework that makes future fulfillment possible, the fact remains, Iran isn't acting alone anymore. And the nations standing with them are precisely the ones an ancient prophet said would come. The coalition isn't theoretical, it's functional. And what happens next might not wait as long as people think.